Welcome to the Naavik Gaming Podcast, where it is our mission to explore the business and future of video games. We bring together the industry's brightest builders, investors, and thinkers to keep a pulse on current events, dissect emerging trends in games, share lessons learned, and have a great time. This podcast is also part of Naavik's growing ecosystem, which ranges from free and premium research to consulting and advisory services. For more information, visit www.naavik.co. This episode is brought to you by Pragma. Pragma is a back-end game engine founded by the engineering leaders who built the platforms for some of the largest live service games, including League of Legends, Fortnite, Destiny 2, and Plants vs. Zombies 2. Pragma powers services like accounts, matchmaking, and player data for the world's most ambitious live service games. The Pragma backend game engine is the only solution that is truly extensible so that game designers aren't blocked by clumsy black box designs. With Pragma, studios no longer need to hire a large backend team and get the ultimate peace of mind that their game will always be ready to scale. To learn more, simply head to pragma.gg or check out the link in the show notes. This episode is brought to you by Coda Payments. Game developers building their free-to-play monetization strategy have a daunting task when considering security, payment methods, user experience, and global expansion. I'm here today with Neil Davidson, Executive Chairman at Coda Payments. Neil, how has Coda Payments helped games teams drive greater success?
We like to say we help mobile game developers think outside the app when it comes to monetization. That's because, outside the app, they can collect payments from their players at half the cost or less of doing so through the app stores. Coda Shop is our global marketplace for game currency and in-game items, trusted by tens of millions of gamers around the world. And developers that want to accept payments outside the app on their own websites can use Coda Pay, which allows them to support hundreds of local payment methods globally with a single integration. Whether our partner leverages Coda Pay, Coda Shop, or any of our other solutions, we offer local market insights, provide live local language customer support, ensure tax compliance, and manage fraud risks. If your listeners are interested in retaining more of the revenue they generate, I hope they'll get in touch with us at Coda.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing, Neil. And if you, our listener, are interested in learning more about how Coda Payments solutions can take your game to the next level, head to codapayments.com or check out the details in the show notes. And with that, let's dive into the weekly roundtable.
Hi, friends. Welcome to the Roundtable. Today, I'm joined by Aaron Bush, co-founder of Naavik, and Dave Elton, president at Blue Line Studios. And I'm filling in as host, Maria Gillis. I work at Pixion Games because Devin is enjoying the fantastic Korea Blockchain Week. Hello, folks.
Howdy. Welcome back to the host seat, Maria.
Oh my gosh, I missed your howdies, Aaron. This is such a throwback. I need your howdies in my life.
They sneak out occasionally. I guess being in Texas does that to you.
So yeah, today we're hitting on so many different topics. We're looking at Data.ai's report. In the last episode, there was some discussion about the PlayStation Plus price increase, but because it came in so hot, we decided to give more freshened takes that had time to simmer today. We're talking about the Starfield launch and so many other great topics. So let's get jumping in. Aaron, what's up with Data.ai?
Yeah, so I just want to give a quick plug and shout out to our partners at Data.ai. They recently published their 2023 Gaming Spotlight report, and it's absolutely worth checking out. It is really mobile focused, of course, and walks through current gaming trends, mobile games that have defined the year so far, mobile ad monetization trends, some of which of that I found interesting, and more. And for those interested in checking out this report, we'll leave a link in the show notes. And we'll also be promoting it again in Naavik Digest sooner than later as well. So you'll probably see it pop up there. And yeah, we might even bring someone from Data.ai to talk about it sometime too. So still seeing how all that's shaken up. But for the time being, definitely recommend just scrolling down to the show notes and checking out that report. I think you'll enjoy it.
I'm not sponsored by Data.ai, so my praise does come from the heart, very genuine. As does yours, Aaron. As does yours. So I actually read the report. It was really good, and it's nice to see. I read every report, and it's nice to see the industry going back to growth. And honestly, Data.ai's materials have just been really good lately. Because I've also read today the ASO key insights. It's just become a tool to level up knowledge across different subjects. So yeah, props to Data.ai. Keep them coming because I'm reading them. All right, we'll jump to PlayStation Plus. That's also you, Aaron. Take the floor.
I know. I'm on a roll this early part of the episode. So yeah, before we move on to completely fresh topics, I did want to hit on this topic that last week's crew mentioned, but was puzzled by a bit and didn't really dig into too much, which is why did PlayStation raise its subscription prices for all of the different PlayStation Plus tiers? And I think the answer is actually very simple. It's just because they can. This is what happens when tens of millions of users are locked into a dominant platform. It gives that platform pricing power. Meaning it can raise prices with minimal financial negativity. And in this place, if it's raising prices 20 to 30, 33%, it's not going to lose anything close to 20%, 30% of its subscriber base because they're locked in. And therefore, PlayStation's profitability increases. The other question was why right now, especially since this market has just been flagged for antitrust concerns with the Xbox and Activision deal. And well, if I had to guess, PlayStation did not raise prices earlier because if it had, it would have shown regulators that a stronger Xbox is still not really a threat to PlayStation's leading position in pricing power. But now that regulators have made up their minds about Xbox and Activision and approved the deal, PlayStation doesn't have to look weaker to sway regulators and judges, so it can now flex. And I guess lastly, while I do personally think that it's kind of lame to have to pay a premium just to access multiplayer, raising prices is normal. And honestly, what they raise prices to, especially the premium tiers, is a bit more in line with Xbox. The base tier is going from essentially $5 a month to $6.60 a month. And even the most premium tier being $13 a month. I know the prices differ by region, I think, a little bit. But, that's not crazy. And if you look at the success of, a video subscription company like Netflix, regularly raising prices as the value of the service increases and as inflation hits, that's kind of the way that it's supposed to work, at least from a business end. So really, from my point of view, it's kind of a non-story. And what it really just shows is that PlayStation is a good business that has real competitive advantages. And the platform should not be complacent and obviously should be working to innovate and grow the value of those subscriptions. But bottom line, most people are going to stick with PlayStation, and PlayStation will now have more money to work with.
I have three additions to why I believe why now. One is raise the price before Black Friday. I'm a locked in user and I always renew on Black Friday because it's cheaper annually. And so I honestly don't care about the price increase. I'm going to keep paying it because I play PlayStation most days. The second one is to raise the prices before the portal. I think that's what it's called. The portal is released, and maybe also a bundle that's rumored potentially to come with the Christmas season. And the third, do it when most people are also raising prices, because you can use the macro and it doesn't come as a surprise, because at least here in the UK, things are starting to come down price wise. And so if they were to do this next year, they would be doing it isolated.
Yeah. And I think the main thing, is, as Aaron and, well, actually, it's both of you rightly hit, I think people have been able to see what the value is. And now Sony said, okay, everyone understands what we're offering. Let's raise the prices up now that everyone understands that I think it's a really good deal, especially, if you're coming from a parent's perspective. You've got a huge library of games, same sort of value proposition as the Xbox Game Pass. and people can go ahead and try out a whole bunch of different flavors of games as it is.
Yeah, it's odd because we say this as analyzing what happened, and me as the player, that's exactly what happened. I got a taste for it, and now you can increase the price unless it's above £20. That's my price elasticity. I still pay it because it's worth it.
Are you a subscriber to the premium tier, Maria?
Is the premium the one that has cloud? I'm the one just below.
I forget the names. Honestly, that's kind of like the bad part of their tiers. No one remembers the names of any of it because they're all, just kind of random and change and such. But yeah, okay, cool. You're the middle tier.
I'm the average tier is my tier.
I think I'm
average.
I think I'm in the below average tier, if that makes you feel any better, Maria. So enjoy your premium experience.
Yay! All right, we'll carry on then to the next topic, and this is with you, Dave.
Thank you. Yes. So I'm sure everyone's aware at this point that both the actors and the screenwriters are on strike in regards to the film industry. But the National Board of the SAG, after announced that they've given strike authorization to its members for working in video games. Now, this doesn't mean that they're able to go on strike right now. Members of the Screen Actors Guild will need to put a vote to it, and I believe that they have until September 25th to put in their votes. But this isn't the first time, though, the actors have gone on strike. So if you think back a number of years, the actors are actually on strike for quite a long period of time, from October 2016 to November of 2017. And it was actually probably I believe it was the longest strike that SAG-AFTRA had actually ever had, somewhere around 340 days. That one was, I think, a little contentious in terms of what the response was from the video game industry, because part of what they were looking for at that point were things like residuals for their performances, something that the actual creators of the video games weren't receiving. So it was seemed a little frustrating in terms of the actors, performers were looking for residuals from the games. This time around, I think probably a case of they have a better understanding of what the video game industry is like, how it is that teams function, how revenue gets split up amongst everybody. But if the strike does go ahead, then they're looking to be going into an agreement with, they have a select number of companies that they set the agreement with. And those include companies like Activision, Electronic Arts, Epic, Insomniac, Take-Two, Warner Brother Games. Publishers where you definitely see a lot of, IP with the actors involved. And this strike, the potential for the strike only affects the performers. It doesn't affect the voice actors. The voice actors are covered under a separate agreement, and that's not under contention at this moment. But for the performers themselves, honestly, I think they're looking for a lot of the same things that they're looking in terms of their agreements on the film side of things. So an increase in terms of pay. They're looking for protection from the use of artificial intelligence inside games, and some realistic things in terms of making sure that medics are on set if they're doing dangerous stunts or any sort of stunt work, that people get appropriate breaks when they're performing. But I think one of the key things again is the AI component. Now, inside games, it's been pretty easy for people to capture the likeness of an actor or actress, or a celebrity talent performer, and be able to bring that into a game, and have multiple uses, across multiple titles. And depending on how those agreements are structured, there's the fear that companies could misuse that ability. There was a story of one actor who performed, had a performance for one particular title, and then was informed by a friend of theirs that they actually showed up inside a different game than what they were actually contracted for. And those are the types of fears that people have. Being able to capture someone's likeness, be it either what their image is or through their voice, and being able to use that multiple times with any sort of compensation, I think is one of the main concerns. Inside the film industry, you hear stories of people being told, hey, you're going to be a background actor. And by the way, we need you to go over there and have a photogrammetry session done of you. There's the worry about, they've come in, they've been paid once, but then the studio is able to use them multiple times. They just want to make sure that that's the same case in the video game space, that anytime their likeness is used or their voice is used, that they will get compensation for that each and every time that they're used. So, interestingly enough, the last time that there was a strike resulted in the contract that has now run out and is now now has the actors in the strike position again. So it'll be interesting to see as we get closer to the end of the month as to whether or not the strike is authorized by all of the members of the Screen Actors Guild. And if they end up adding that to the number of strikes that are going on. It'll also be interesting to see how many people this actually affects. If you think of indie companies, they don't use Screen Actor Guild members in order to do their voiceovers or motion capture or things like that. So, this is something that will more likely just affect the larger companies. But at the same time, as we see more and more celebrities being brought in to advertise games, to be part of games, I think the potential impact starts to become larger and larger. So even though there may be companies that aren't part of the negotiation teams, they may still get affected by actors not wanting to do work in solidarity with those that are working with the aforementioned companies.
Yeah, I have mixed feelings about all of this in general. On one hand, much of what these people are asking for in the strike is totally fair and I think should be respected. Like the health benefits, more fair residuals, when stunts are performed, that there's safety measures, the whole, better rules around, using people's likeness. Like all of that makes a ton of sense. And also part of it too is just especially as the structure of video has changed with like streaming services compared to what it used to be with TV, like just like new structures demand like changes into how contracts are structured. And so it makes a lot of sense to revisit that. The problem though with strikes like this, and even strikes we saw a decade ago elsewhere, like Walk on Wall Street, if any of you remember that, is that as momentum builds and as these strikes grow, the demands expand and they become less focused. And therefore, they become harder and harder to agree with in any type of like real practical way. So in the case of this strike, even though there are some fair demands that would help fix the system, there are also demands that don't make sense. Like writers want firm limits on the way artificial intelligence can be used. If it's around their likeness, specifically around like them, the actor, maybe that makes sense. But basically everything else they're asking for makes no sense whatsoever. It's just, like trying to put their foot down in the face of like innovation and progress in some kind of way. And so like in the same way, it would not have made sense for, like groups like this to protest like new types of cameras in the past or virtual effects in the past. It does not make sense for them to like put demands around artificial intelligence and the use of like movies and TV and potentially games as well. Also, what we see in the market really is a result of supply and demand. There are way more good actors and writers than there are spots for them, which is a sad reality, but the market rates very much reflect that. And, maybe the minimum rates should be higher. I don't know, or at least something structurally changed. But even so, that doesn't fundamentally change like the core economics that are at play that lead to these strikes every time a contract, the broader contracts go, they expire. And so, I think that these contracts kind of ignore meritocracy and kind of built for the lowest common denominator, which is good for some people, holds others back, but it's kind of hard to build systems around. And so when I see the news that maybe the strike will now extend to video games, part of me shakes my head. And I'm sure there's some merit to improvements that can be made in the video game industry, absolutely. But, yet again, this is a strike with growing demands that would become less focused and therefore harder to agree with. And also, video games are just different from video. And so if it's harder when it's, filming and you're filming actual people, but in video games, it actually would probably accelerate the use of artificial intelligence and the things that these people don't want to happen. And so I think that if, it gets unionized and gets played the wrong way, it could actually backfire on the people who want the change the most when it comes to gaming. So yeah, I don't think it'll impact the games industry nearly as much as it's impacted elsewhere in entertainment. But yeah, some good, some bad, but really at a risk of just becoming more unfocused the longer this goes on, in my view.
I'm sorry, but I really want to challenge that view because I won't discuss the usual progression of a strike, that it grows in demands, negotiations, things get put to the side. I don't want to discuss that. I think that's a fair assessment. I think it would be a shame if we don't see consequences coming from the strike on the industry. The demands are fair. You, as your person, should be compensated wherever your data, in air quotes, is used. Likeness, like whatever it is, motion capture, animation. If you were paid to do a job and the contract was for a specific usage, if it's used elsewhere, you should be compensated for your work. And I understand the apprehension, like especially even though you have a contract, you have to trust who you're working with because you don't have access to their internal systems. Maybe someone who did the motion capture left, someone new joins, they see that data and they think, oh, this is fine to use. I'm just going to put it in a prototype, and then the prototype is released, and there's your data and your work being used. And also with the usage of AI, I think if AI wants to be applied, fair enough, but it has to be disclosed when you're doing the contract with whoever's doing the creation, whether it's the acting, the voice acting, the writing, because it affects your creative work and your name is going to be on it. Like I wouldn't want to write a script and then I appear in the credits and I'm the person who did it, and then it's changed by AI, and there's nothing in credits or me being told that is going to be altered. I think it's really fair, and I do hope change comes from it because it makes sense.
Yeah, I don't think I disagree with anything that you just said. There's a lot that is fair here. I think what I'm really trying to point out is that the more momentum and people and groups that kind of get behind movements like this historically kind of lead to it losing focus and no longer standing for one main thing in particular. And it just becomes harder to agree with as a whole when more and more demands get thrown in, some of which make sense, but some of them don't. So like even with AI specifically, I think that if it's leveraging someone's likeness, having demands around that makes a ton of sense. But having demands around AI as a whole and whether it should be used or not, whether it if it's not about someone's likeness and it's just about if AI can write and compete with people or if AI can voice act and compete with people. A lot of it is these people just trying to protect the future of jobs. And I think maybe there's something to that, but it's different from likeness. And some of it, if it just gets in the way of progress of technology as a whole, I don't think that's the right move. And especially if it gets conflated with all the other issues, I think that might harm their case more than help. Honestly, I'm pretty optimistic that this will get sorted out in a matter of time and it'll actually be improvements for them. And probably a lot of these technological concessions will fade, is my guess. But yeah, that's kind of the nuance and what you're saying, I would add.
Yeah. I think So I can use probably a sample case here as to where I think some of the potential challenges and where people are thinking of things going. So if you think back to Harry Potter, and you have your lead actors and actresses from the film series, and if you were able to capture the main actors and actresses when they started, so they're year one, and you're able to capture their full likeness, do voice capture at that point, you then would be able to create, theoretically, a whole wide variety of materials around year one of Harry Potter. And, rather than, having to try and figure out, well, how do we take actors as they are today, de-age them, or try and, figure out how they can capture them and then change what their appearances are or mannerisms are so that it matches when they were children. But if you were then able to capture, the actors as they were year one and then be able to use them for decades, from a creator's perspective, that's fantastic. That means I always have access to that. From a performer's perspective, it's like, well, but am I going to be compensated for that every time you use them? Especially as with the advances of being able to do voice alteration, you could end up with somebody, creating a full performance of, one of the actors, like, Rupert. All of a sudden, you've got him playing for decades, all under the control of the game studio or the film studio rather than under the actor's control. And I think that's one of the main worries. From a creator's perspective, I'm like, that's fantastic. I could be able to use that to be able to continue to generate content. I personally would hope that I would want to be, continue to compensate the actor for their original performance as well as for continuing use of them. But that's not how things are structured right now. And I think that's one of the main worries, that you can recreate them for forever.
Great. Well, we will continue to monitor how the strike progresses and how the gaming world gets sucked into it or not. But in a more immediate topic, however, let's talk about what is probably the most anticipated launch of 2023, and that would be Starfield. Also, I'll just quickly note that Maria is having technical difficulties, so Dave and I will take it from here. But Starfield. Yeah, so this has been a big week with Starfield finally out for launch after years of people patiently waiting for this game. And even though some reviews are all over the place and even some are quite critical, really the reviews as a whole are holding up really well, such as the game maintaining an 88 Metascore, which is quite strong. Also, anecdotally, it seems like this game is much less of a buggy launch compared to some previous Bethesda games, so you can see the polish that went into making sure this game was ready for prime time. And of course, from the biggest factor of this game from our business of gaming perspective is that it's the first major Bethesda game and AAA game of its type to find itself in the middle of Xbox's current hybrid sales strategy, where some people are going to buy the game outright and some people will play through Game Pass. And maybe this game will even help sell some consoles. And so the question, is how exactly will this game move the needle? And how could that influence how Xbox manages these types of releases in the future? And because Xbox has a bit of a have your cake and eat it too strategy right now, it'll be interesting to see how the numbers shake out. Because on one hand, the game's premium edition was for sale before the game even came to Game Pass. And the enormous pre-sales from that likely helped Xbox recuperate some of its costs quickly. And we'll hopefully see some more data on that soon. And then, of course, there's all sorts of data on how Xbox console sales have accelerated in the past week, too. And so that's probably going to be a bit more of a shorter term blip from this launch. But, good for Xbox to see that. But of course, the more interesting question is how will this launch impact Game Pass? And given that growth was actually pretty flat for Game Pass recently, in the next quarter or two, we should get a pretty good view on how this launch turbocharged signups or not, and then we can start doing, all the math around it. But, kind of before diving into that, I just kind of wanted to pause and, hear your just early impressions of the game, if you've played it or seen things. And then also just curious to hear your thoughts on this game's impact on Game Pass as a whole.
Well, I've certainly been following the launch, but I'll be playing it on Game Pass, so I didn't get the early access. I do think that, I think it's actually, by the sounds of it, like a really good launch for Bethesda from the people that have played it. Certainly anecdotally getting a lot of the same feedback. Some people, the very first few hours have been, well, I'm not really sure what's going on here. But, the more they get into it, the more that they feel like, hey, this is actually something phenomenal for them to play through. And certainly I've not seen the number of bugs and complaints about the game as I have seen for a number of other Bethesda launches or experience at Bethesda launches. But very much looking forward to diving into it now that it's in general release. Certainly, I do expect that it will drive some additional signups for Game Pass. For me, I think the really big question for Microsoft as a whole is, can they follow up? Can they, really use this as the beginning of a number of first-party titles to help drive the business forward? I think this is, if they're not able to do that, then I think they've got some challenges in terms of trying to, continue to claw their way up in terms of percentage of market share. And I think it really does. Is that key indicator in terms of how well is the pass going to work for the company overall? If they're not able to bring in that constant wave of first-party titles to help bolster it, I think they're going to find some more challenges in that area.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I do think it will move the needle for Game Pass pretty immediately. I don't know. It'll be interesting to see. Is it going to be like a 10% lift, a 20% lift? Like what's the kind of lift that one game can drive for Game Pass right now? So I'm really curious to see those numbers when they start reporting and updating. But I completely agree with you, Dave, that the big question is really about churn and retention. Because in a subscription business, obviously games like this are the tent poles that pull people in. And you can even look at other companies like Netflix and see that, of course, like in their quarters of the biggest tentpole releases, like a Stranger Things, that's when they get the most subscriber growth. So launches like this are really important. But to the economics of a subscription business, churn and retention is like ultimately like the savior or killer of what you do. And even like pretty like marginal differences can add up pretty tremendously over time and impact your LTV. And so, yeah, it is a huge question of whether they can follow up on this game, what the timeline of that can be, and what frequency can they satisfy the same type of gamer that gets pulled in for a game like Starfield. I have a feeling they'll execute on it okay, probably better than the past, although it won't be perfect. But it is notable how much like the churn can vary, because again, like video games, completely different business from video. But if you look at video, a company like Netflix has a, call it like 3% monthly churn rate. And that's best in class by far. Like no one is really competing with that, except for maybe like cable in the past, which was even better. But as you start going down the list of Disney Plus, Max, and you start getting to the Paramount Pluses and the Peacocks of the world, the monthly churn is more like 8%, 9%. And is just like not in a position to create value if you're also trying to invest heavily into growing your content. And it just leads to burn. And so it's going to be really important for Xbox Game Pass to, find a way to like really level up its retention, because going from, I don't know what it is now, but if it is going from like 8% to 5%, That's not like a 3% revenue increase. That's like a very heavy compounding effect that greatly impacts the economics per person and what enables Xbox to reinvest into future growth and content and such to keep the cycle rolling. So yeah, that's the big question. The other question in my mind is just like how being on Game Pass will affect the legs of this game. Like even today, a game like Skyrim is still holding up pretty well in terms of like over a decade later, it still continues to sell and somehow maintain pricing power to a decent degree, which is crazy. And most 99.99% of games will not be able to do what a game like Skyrim has done, right? And I don't know if Starfield would fall into that same category even, but it'll be interesting to see how the long-term legs and kind of value driver of this game are different because it's on subscription form versus just being able to buy it outright. And you'll see a mix, but I have a feeling what it'll do is it lowers the barriers to entry. And so people might actually spend more time in a game like Starfield because it's just easier for, tens of millions of people to try it out over the next decade or so. But it probably won't lead to the same type of revenue long tail that we saw from Skyrim. At least it can be directly attributable to that game. So I don't know. I think the net economics, if I had to guess, it is net negative in this weird hybrid form versus kind of selling more a la carte. But the only thing that would change that is that retention number. If they could increase that retention from their whole system, that is what would make the economics here better. But might be a bit of a far-fetched dream for a while. We'll have to see. Okay, Dave, take us home with the final topic. I was curious when you added the topic of Humble Bundle to our docket because I think it might be the first time we've ever discussed this company in depth on the podcast, but very curious. Humble Bundle, what's going on?
For those that are not familiar with the Humble Bundle, basically they started off as selling a collection of indie titles in, funny enough, a bundle. And have certainly grown a lot over the years. So they now are a digital storefront where you can get games, books, software. And most recently, Alan Patmore has been talking about what the future of Humble Bundle looks like. And he did give an interview with Game Developer Magazine during the latest Gamescom, where he talked about some of the ways that Humble Bundle could be going in terms of even potentially going as far as acquiring studios. So where they have been to this point has really been, supporting game developers most recently, and they've been working on acquiring IP and working with second-party developers to build out that IP. And where they do see things as a potential extension of where they are these days is actually acquiring studios or acquiring the ability to develop properties internally. So inside the Humble Bundle company. And it really is an interesting change for me, seeing that evolution of what the company is. They started off as a way of being able to help celebrate some really fantastic indie games and be able to bring those out to consumers, to really looking at, well, how do we, go beyond just supporting the indie community, but actually start looking at, helping them even by being publishers, helping with funding of titles, and now being able to acquire IP and create games on their own. So for me, it's been really interesting to see the growth. Now the Humble community, the way, one of their big selling point, I think for me personally, is that they look at these transactions, not just transactions that help support the developer and themselves, but they also support charities around the world. And they've been able to contribute over $240 million to charities since 2010. So it's certainly not a small effort on their part. And they really do support some really good charities around the world, I think. So For me, it'll be interesting to see as they continue. Do they become a larger and larger force for in terms of building their own games, and how do they continue? Is the pricing model still the same, where people are able to pay what they'd like to pay effectively, and determine how much of what they're paying goes towards charity versus goes towards the developer publisher split. So I think for me, it's really going to be interesting to see how they continue to be a force for good. Being able to take the hobby of playing games and making it into something that really supports a lot of people outside of the hobby as well. And I'm really looking forward to see what they're able to do. They certainly have taken, as they become more and more to the forefront in terms of being a publisher, they're taking their own stances. AI is one of the things that they spoke out about recently, and making sure that they really are really only going to support ethical use of generative AI. So unless you're able to prove that your sources are well documented, they're clean, then they're going to question as to why is it that you should be using generative AI inside the projects. But yeah, overall, I'm really looking forward to seeing what they do. I think they've been working with some really good IP over the last little while, and I expect to see that grow over time. And also for me, the good thing is that they're not just diving headfirst into it. They are taking a very methodical look at who they're partnering up with what games and what studios they're partnering and trying to bring to the marketplace in that aspect. So I'm hoping for some slow but solid growth from the company, and interested to see the types of games that they come out with. I expect they'd probably still stay within the sort of that indie realm in terms of the games that they're going to be building out internally. But they also do have some great partnerships with some of the larger players as well. So.
Awesome. Well, let's go ahead and wrap up the episode here. On behalf of Maria and Dave, thank you all, as always, for tuning in. We really appreciate all of you. And as a reminder, you can hit us up at podcast@naavik.co with any questions or feedback. We always appreciate your emails and comments. But with that, we'll go ahead and wrap up here and catch you next time. If you enjoyed today's episode, whether on YouTube or your favorite podcast app, make sure to like, subscribe, comment, or give a 5-star review. And if you want to reach out or provide feedback, shoot us a note at podcast@naavik.co or find us on Twitter and LinkedIn. Plus, if you want to learn more about what Naavik has to offer, make sure to check out our website, www.naavik.co. There, you can sign up for the #1 games industry newsletter, Naavik Digest, or contact us to learn about our wide-ranging consulting and advisory services. Again, that is www.naavik.co. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you in the next episode.